Hey, what's going on? My name is Prakash. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Xano. Today we're going to be working with the Salesforce API, and I'll show you how to send data like lead information to Salesforce and creating a new lead using Xano. Now, you can use any backend, not just Xano, but we're going to work in Xano today because it makes it really easy to do. So a good example of when you might want to use this is, let's say you are building an app, and every time there's a new user created in your app, you want to send lead data over to Salesforce so your sales team can pick it up. We'll show you exactly how to do that today. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm in a Xano workspace. I'm going to go to an API, or my API, and I'm going to create an API endpoint starting from scratch, and I'm going to call this Salesforce Lead Creator. Okay, I'm going to change this to a post command, and I'm going to say save. Okay, so now that we're here, let me just tell you what's going to happen. So I'm going to build this out in a second, but basically this is going to take a first name and last name and email, and then once it's sent, it's going to basically populate a new lead here in my Salesforce instance, right? And then that way a sales team member can pick it up and do whatever they want with it. In order to do this, there are two API endpoints we want to use in Salesforce. The first is authorization, right? And we are authorizing with Salesforce using OAuth 2. If you don't know what that is, I'm going to leave a link below where I describe what OAuth is. But you're basically validating who you are with Salesforce using your Salesforce username and password. There's another way to do this using a service account, so it's not tied to your username and password, but we're not going to cover that today. After you authorize, you're going to be given an access token, and that's going to enable you to query Salesforce's comprehensive API. And today we're going to create a record, more specifically a lead, but you can do many different things once you get that access token. You can update a record, you can delete it. They have a very robust API, and they also have different versions. Mine happens to be 48, but you can change to any version that you want, and they're mostly same in terms of capabilities, but it's worth just kind of going through the different APIs to see if it does or accomplishes exactly what you want. Anyways, all that said, we're going to use create a record after we authorize with the application. So before we get started with any of this, the first thing that we actually have to do is to create an app in Salesforce. You have to create an app in order to use any sort of API with Salesforce. The way you do this is you go to this gear icon and you go to setup. You may not have access to this, so you may have to ask for permissions from your administrator. But once you get it, then you can just go to the app manager. And then the app manager is right over here. And what you're going to look for is you're going to create a new connected app. So I'll do that right now. And then I'm going to just fill out the required fields. So in this app name, I'm going to just type in like SF Xano, and then it'll automatically fill out this canonical. Sure, I'll just do a@b.com. And then what you want to really make sure of is to select this enable OAuth settings, okay? Because that's how we're going to log in with OAuth. The callback URL, you can just use this URL by Xano, right? So let me go back over here, okay? I'm going to paste that in. So once again, I just copied it from here, and now I'm pasting it in here. And then in terms of scope, I'm going to give myself full access just for this demo purposes, right? But you want to obviously obey the policies of your organization if you're a big organization, and if you're not, this will work just fine for you. All right, now with all of that done, I'm going to click Save and continue. All right, so now that that is done, the next thing that I want to do is, remember, I'm using OAuth, and in order to use OAuth, I have to have what's called a consumer key and secret. And I know this because if I look at their API command to validate who I am, you can see that it's asking for a key and a secret over here. So I'm going to go back here. So I've lost in tabs, and I'm going to click Manage Consumer Details. So it's going to open up this Consumer Details page, and you can see there's a key and a secret. Now, this is very confidential information. I'm going to delete this app right after I do this demo, but I'm basically going to copy and paste this information in to Xano entirely. So let's go back to the API that I have to set up. The first one is this authorization. Well, luckily there's a curl command. That's a command URL, and I can just copy that directly. And then here in Xano, the first function I'm going to add is an external API request because we're calling Salesforce. And I'm going to do an import curl, and I'm going to paste in what I just copied from over here. So when I paste that in, you can see it auto-populates everything that I need. So it's asking for my domain name, the grant type, my consumer key, my secret, and it's also going to ask me for my login and my password. Now, I can manually type all of this in here, but just to keep things confidential, I'm going to put it in environment variables. Environment variables are a place where you can store sensitive information that you can have access to whenever you need it. So I just clicked on the settings icon. I'm going to click manage, and I'm going to add a couple variables. So I'm going to call this SF consumer key, and this can be called anything you want. It's just a variable as long as you remember it. Consumer secret, right? And the reason I'm doing that is this is consumer key, consumer secret. It's also going to need my domain, SF domain name. It's going to need my username, and then it's going to need my password. And I'll also do one more that I'm going to use later called my instance name. Now, my instance name might be exactly the same as my domain name, but it might be lowercase. So if it's like Xano with a capital X, the instance name is almost always lowercase. So for the key and the secret, you basically take this key, you copy it, you go back to Xano, and you paste the key. You're going to do the same thing over here with the secret, and then you paste that over here. And then I'll do the rest of this, and then I'll hit save. Okay, so now that I've saved this, I'm going to go back to my API, and then I'm going to click back into my API endpoint. So here what we have is all this information, so I'm going to start replacing everything right now. So where it says my domain name, let me expand this out. You can see that it's doing this authorization, and I'm going to replace this my domain name. So the easiest way for me to do that is just to highlight this. I'm going to click save, and I'm going to add a filter. And I'm going to use what's called the replace filter in Xano. And I can just type in replace. There it is. And then what I'm going to search for, well, is that text that I just copied. I'm searching for my domain name, and I'm going to replace it with, you see all these environment variables that I just added over here? I'm going to replace it with my domain name over here. So I'm going to click save. All right, so there's my domain name. Now, the grant type should be password. That's correct. My consumer key, again, I could hard code it here, but I'm just going to use the environment variable. So the environment variable, I want the consumer key. There it is. And I'm going to hit update, and you'll know because you see this env over here. Same thing with secret. And then my username and my password. Username, and then finally my password. And where is my password? There it is. Okay, so I've done all of that correctly. I'm going to hit save, and I'm looking at all of this information here. I think I've done it all right. Okay, so before I run it, what I actually need to do is back in Salesforce, now that I have the consumer key and secret, I need to basically relax the policy or the IP restriction. All that means is that Salesforce is very particular about the services that connect to it. I'm going to make it to where Xano can actually access Salesforce and add to it. So before I leave here, I'm going to generate this stage consumer details because it requires me to do that, and then I'm going to just click apply. All right, so now that's all ready to go, and I'm going to go ahead and close that window. I'll go back to my connected apps over here. And what I want to do over here is I believe I want to go to, I think it's manage connected apps, manage connected, there it is. So I'm going to select that. And remember, I'm in setup right now. I'm going to find this SF Xano, that one that I just created. So when I select that, you can see this IP relaxation is enforce IP restrictions. I want to change that. I'm going to click edit policies. And I want to change that to relax IP restrictions. This means that I'm allowing Xano to access this. Now, obviously, if you're part of a large organization, you want to make sure to stay within the nature of the policies that are enforced, but that will make it work for me over here. So that's what I want to do here. And the last thing that I want to do is I want to type in this search box and set up identity verification. The reason why I want to go here is I want to look at the checkboxes here. So you obviously, again, will want to see which ones are checked. But if you have, for example, these top three selected, you're going to have to jump through a couple more hurdles in order to get this to work. So this is the setup that I have that gets all of this working properly. So if I've done everything right, remember, once I execute this, I'm going to get an access token back. It shows me kind of what I should be getting back over here. Sometimes, by the way, Salesforce takes like 5 to 10 minutes for things to really kick in, but I'm feeling lucky, so I'm just going to go ahead and try it now. So remember, I've just run all of this. API 1 is what it's being returned as, and that's what I'm returning in my response. I've relaxed the restrictions, so hopefully everything should go okay. So let's give it a try. I'm going to click Run and Debug, and then I'm going to hit Run. There we go. So this is just a note. If it doesn't work the first time or it says unauthorized, that means that you might have to just double-check your username, password, or your consumer key or secret. As long as that is all put in properly with no spaces, you should be just fine. So what we actually want to do, or the thing that we want out of this is the access token, because we're going to use that to access the next thing. So this first API call is authorizing. The next one is going to be to create the lead itself. So I'm going to click Add. I'll go External API Request. And then for this one, I'm going to go to create a record. So this is a little deceiving because we definitely want to use this, but for one, the nature of their curl command is a little strange because they use a file instead of putting in the parameters of first name and last name. And also, they don't have the right URL for this specific record. So actually, it's yourinstance.my.salesforce.com. All that being said, I'm just going to show you how to do it correctly. So you basically first copy this first section. We're going to do it manually. It's going to work great, hopefully. And so you're gonna paste it in here. And I'm going to hit this little expando thing. So this is my instance. That's the part I'm going to replace. But the part, again, that wasn't made clear in the documentation is I want to put a my. So it's myinstance.my.salesforce.com. The next thing I want is the version of the API. You can do any one you want, but my specific one that I'm working with is 48, so that's what I'm going to do. You can copy it if you want. And then instead of an account, I'm going to actually be creating a lead, okay? So I'm going to hit Save. It's a get right now. I'm going to change this to a post. And then instance, again, I'm going to make sure that this is replaced using that fancy trick I showed you before. So I'm going to hit Add Filter. I'm going to say Replace. And I'm going to put in that text, and then I'm going to replace it with SF instance, and I'm going to hit update. Okay, so now that's done. All right, so then the parameters. So if I go back here, this is what's in new account in newaccount.json. Now, you don't have to pass a file. It's just a way to basically send these key value pairs of what you're sending to Salesforce. And you can find out more information about by clicking the Salesforce object basic information, but I'll just show you. You basically can just paste what I just copied there. You can click import, and you can see here that it's set a key and a value. So it's set the name as express, logic, and transport. So this actually is what this is. So I specifically want 3 fields. I want first name, last name, and email. And because I've worked with Salesforce before, I know what they're looking for. And again, you can get all of the information for the fields by clicking this and learning more. So for first name, they're going to be looking for first name. And then I'll hard code that as Jane. Okay, and then I want the last name too. So I'm going to do this quick set. So I'm setting a key and a value. So I'm going to do last name. So they always do this kind of like camel case, last name. And then I'm going to say Doe. And then there's one more thing that I want. I want the email address. Now you can do any field within a lead or an account, and you can set that up here, but that's what I'm going to hard code in for now. So I'm going to do email now, and it's always capitalized. So email, and the email will just be jane@doe.com. All right, so now we have those 3 things. All right, so now that we have that, now we have to go into our headers. And if I go here, that's what this -h is, right? So anytime you see a -h, that represents a header. I'm just going to take this. All right, so now what I'll do is I'll go back to Xano, and I want to do a push on this header, and I'm just going to do this bear and then token. And we're going to replace this token right over here using that fancy replace filter, I'm replacing token with what I'm getting back from API 1. And that's not right yet, but I'm going to show you what I'm doing first. So there's that, and I'm going to hit save. So real quick, I'm going to get the token from this username and password that I entered in, and I'm going to enter it in here to create the lead itself. There's two more things that I want to go ahead and add over here. So I'm going to do a quick push, and then I want to do the content type as JSON. Don't worry, I'll paste all of this in so you have it. And then there's one more that I will do just for good measure. And again, this is just making sure that the headers are correct, so all of the requests go through properly for Salesforce, because Salesforce is a little finicky sometimes. Okay, so we've got everything. So before we finish this out, let me comment this out, and I want to show you how to get just the access token that we need. So remember, when I ran this before, I'm getting back an access token right over here. Well, if I scroll to the top and I hit this copy icon, it's going to copy this entire request, this massive payload that I'm getting back. And actually what I want to do is I want to then uncomment this out, and I want to go over here, and instead of just the API 1, that big payload, I want to narrow in to just that access token piece. So I can click subpath, and I can paste in what I copied, and I can click define. This allows me to traverse into the response and just get the access token here. So this is using what we call dot notation. It's in our documentation, but this allows us to go into the API 1, that payload, and go all the way just to get the access token, and then we hit update. So there we go. So I've now authorized it in function 1, and this one should manually hard code Jane Doe with the email jane@doe.com using the token that we're getting back from API 1 with all of the correct headers. So if I've done this right, and I come back here, I should see that it will be added to the top, okay? And I know a lot of this is obfuscated just to keep the privacy of the leads, but let's see if Jane Doe gets added. So I'm going to hit run and debug, and I'm going to hit run. So looking at this, I am actually, I'm returning API 1 instead of, I'm returning API 1 instead of API 2. So that's why it didn't show me any ID that got created. But let's just go back to our leads, and let's refresh this page. And let's see if we see Jane Doe at the top. And we do. There's Jane Doe. So that is correct. So if I select Jane Doe over here, I can see that Jane Doe is here. Email is jane@doe.com. Again, I could add more of these fields, but we're going to keep it simple for now. So let me go ahead and delete Jane. And so basically, we've done this first part. That all works great. So the next thing that I actually want to do is I want to take in a couple inputs, right? Because right now I'm hard coding in the first name, last name, and email address. Well, I want to make them variable. So I'm going to go to inputs, and I'm just going to say the input will just be, and I'll do the same format, first name, and then I'll do last name and email. Last name, and then I'll do an email address. And I could have done that as email as well. It would have worked, but there we go. So there's all three of them. And so now here, instead of hard coding it, I can change Jane out for an input. Let me reset it. Input first name. And I'll do the same thing with last name. And I'll do the same thing finally with email. All right, so this now allows us to have it be variable. So when I hit run and debug, and let me actually, while I'm here, let me change this from API 1 to API 2 so you can see what the response looks like after you create the lead. I'll just say Johnny Depp. I don't know why. jdepp@email.com. And now when I run this, right, if I scroll down, it shows me the ID of the user that was created, and it'll always say success true. And if I go back and I refresh this, I should see Johnny Depp here at the top. Okay, great. So now that I've done all of this, well, the cool thing is I can actually create this as a function that I can use every time a new user is created in Xano. So if I hit these three dots, and if I go to convert to function, I can just call that, sure, I'll leave it the same, Salesforce lead creator, and I'll hit save. All right? And this function actually can be used anywhere I want. So what does that mean? If I go back to my API, you can see that there is an API that signs up users and adds them into my database. So if I go over to my database, I can see I have a user table with a name and an email. And just to match things up, why don't I just do? I'll do first name. Let me go last name. Okay, just to keep it straightforward, we'll do name, last name, and email. Okay, so if I use the API endpoint, I'll use the API auth signup. I'm going to create the name Prakash. We'll do prakash@email.com, and we will do password 123. Okay, so now when I do that, I get that auth token because this one actually, after you sign up the user, creates an auth token so I can access authenticated endpoints within Xano. But more importantly, you can see in step 3 of the function, it added the user to that database table. So let's go and look and make sure that Prakash was added. There. Okay, great. So I didn't collect a last name, so I can do two things in signup. So the first thing is I don't need to create an authentication token. I'm just going to get rid of it entirely here. What I do want to do, however, is I want to add a function, a custom function, the one I just added, the Salesforce creator. And it takes in these 3 inputs. So you're seeing how cool Xano is here, okay? So actually, I'll do it after that's created. So here, let me just kind of show you how this works. So first, the last name wasn't defined because I just added that field. So let me go ahead and do that now. I want to take that last name and I want to set it to, actually, let me add an input. Last name. Okay, great. So now here, I want to change this to last name. And then so here, instead of returning this auth token, which I'm not returning anymore, I'm going to add, or I'm going to change that to user. Let me comment this out for now just to show you how this works. So it returns the user that I just create. So let me say Prakash2 @email.com. And then last name is my last name. Okay, there we go. So it returns everything, my last name, and if I go to the database, I should see I'm in here. So the final step is, again, adding the Salesforce lead creator. So if I uncomment this and I click on it, so it's asking, what are you going to use for the first name and last name and email? Well, I want it to automatically take from whatever user is, or whatever the information is from this create user API. So here, the first name I'm going to use from this user. That's what I'm getting from over here. So I'm going to say user.name, because I didn't change. If I go to DB preview, you can see it's just name. So it's name, last name, and email. That's what I want. So I go name, so user.last name, last underscore name. And then, let me just double check. Yep, that's right. And then email. User.email. All right, so if I have done everything correctly, this means that when this API endpoint is used, and again, you would like connect this to like the front end of your application, but they would basically type in like Prakash5 @email.com, password, or let me just do a completely new name. I'll just say Sean, do Sean @email.com, password 123, and then Montgomery, that's our CEO. So when I run this, if I've done everything correctly, Sean Montgomery should not only be added as a user to Xano, but should be also added as a lead to Salesforce. So I'm going to click Run. I see that Sean was created. If I go to the database, I can see he was created here, Sean Montgomery. And then finally, if I refresh this, I can see that he was created here as a lead in Salesforce as well. So that concludes the demo. I really just wanted to show you how you can basically connect to the Salesforce API. You do authorization, you connect to any API endpoint that you want, and then you're able to send leads, send accounts, create accounts easily within Salesforce. If you have not already done so, please check out the webhook video that I created to show you, like, when you create a lead in Salesforce, how you can pass that information back into a tool like Xano. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.